welcome everyone. Welcome in this new episode. Today I'm with Aurimas Griciūnas. I hope I pronounced it well. Aurimas, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you. What about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. So Aurimas, let's start this new podcast and welcome back on the Let's Talk AI podcast. We're super happy to be here together. We've been having a few feedbacks regarding some questions of topics you wanted to discuss, so we'll take those into account. Speaking with Aurimas. So we were in our first call together, sharing a bit about your experience and what you've achieved and what we could talk in this episode. And there are so many interesting things. So first of all, maybe to the people who doesn't know you, could you describe yourself in a few words, in a few sentences?
Okay. So, as mentioned, I'm Aurimas, and I've kind of live and breathe data, right? So I'm in a data world now for 11 years. So all of my professional experiences in data, of course, some of engineering there as well. So I've been doing data analytics. I've been doing data science, machine learning, data engineering, cloud engineering, MLOps engineering, and then I also led some teams of data engineers, data platform engineers, and cloud engineers. So
Hmm.
yeah, this is me. I have two dogs. I have
Oh,
I'm happily married to my wife. And what else? I kind of set aside the exercising part, but I really loved to do that, and I'm planning to get back to it. And yeah, what else? For personal thing, really like reading books, but I do read a lot of technical books. So some
uh-huh.
people would say too much of technical.
All right, awesome. That's a great picture for anyone who didn't know you. Um, um, uh, what kind of dogs do you have? This is the first question I want to go
that's a,
with.
that's a very good question. So I have a Labrador and I have a
Okay,
standard poodle. So if
okay.
you would imagine Labrador, then my poodle is 1.5 times bigger than the Labrador. Uh,
Wow. Okay, that's a great way to start a podcast about AI, I think.
yeah.
So let's dive a bit more towards AI. May I ask you, what are you trying to achieve today in the field? I know that you're having your own company at the moment. So what are you trying to achieve and what do you do on a daily basis today?
Yeah. So okay. So first of all, so I'm full-time employee in uh, Neptune.ai.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my company, but I also
Oh,
do have a side gig, let's call it.
mm-hmm.
So I'll maybe start with Neptune.ai because this is where I spend most of my day on. So it really connects to what I like doing and what I was doing in my previous jobs. So basically, Neptune.ai is just not just, but it's a central piece of a MLOps stack as machine
Okay.
learning operations, and it allows you to store your metadata in different ways and then display it, collaborate on it, and track it for reproducibility purposes. And as well, it provides a model registry now so that you can more easily connect your model deployment pipelines to the rest of your MLOps stack.
Mm-hmm.
But looking a little bit broader, I really love the entire MLOps space. So
Mm-hmm.
EI does really fit very well into it. But then
Mm-hmm.
again, I am more of a to connect the entire stack to a
Mm.
product and helping the companies that are the customers to be
Mm.
successful in it. And
Okay.
my personal gig, which is SwirlAI, also really resonates with that as well. So I'm trying to actually educate the community on these topics. So everything about data and a little bit more, not just MLOps and machine learning, but data engineering as well. So how
Mm.
to connect the full data lifecycle from the data creation till the actual product that people
Mm.
see and that generates value for businesses.
Awesome. So you have to branch. I'll get back on the second one on the
Yeah.
you sharing value. Um, uh, we will talk about what kind of topics do you approach and how do you approach them, because this is super interesting and but to come back in the matching MLOps parts. So you mentioned that you've kind of done everything. You've been an engineer, cloud engineer. You were a data scientist also at some points,
Yes.
and so you've done all of that. to the people who are listening, who are, for example, more into data engineer at the moment, or more data scientist. I know a lot of people like Joris, for example. He's a recovering data scientist. He was forced into data engineer.
Yes.
So how would you explain in a few words matching MLOps?
Mhm.
And yeah, that would be my first question. How would you describe in a few words MLOps?
So MLOps is described very differently if you would look into how people describe it today. But it's maybe sometimes it's because of not being too deep into that, because MLOps essentially is a set of practices, and not even it's not about tooling. It's not about doing something in the field. It's about set of practices that allow you
Mm-hmm.
to more efficiently bring value by delivering ML machine learning product from the
Mm-hmm.
initiation to the actual production.
Mm-hmm.
And it really covers a lot of things, like things like tooling as well, things like processes, things like organizational structures, things like a cultural thing, because
Mm-hmm.
you need to have some of that in your company in order to efficiently actually promote MLOps practices, etc.
Hmm. All right. So let's say, because in the second episode of Let's Talk AI, I was talking with Gustavo, and we kind of introduced MLOps, and he was really going into MLOps. You talk about tooling, data organization, strategy. Um, so today in the company, um, how do you implement on a daily basis? Like, how do you adapt the project, and how does the project gives value uh, using MLOps?
Uh, so first of all, getting back to it again, so MLOps brings value by efficiently deploying machine learning models. So machine learning
Mm-hmm.
is what brings the value, right? So
Yes.
very simple example: recommendation systems in your website that recommends
Yes.
stuff to people, and people are more likely to buy the stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what MLOps brings to all of this is how do you produce a large amount of machine learning models throughout the organization. So you could think horizontal scaling of models, not necessarily vertical. So not making one model better, but having lots of them and efficiently iterating, experimenting on them, and then
Mm-hmm.
with least amount of effort, moving them through the machine learning pipeline and automatically deploying them into production as a service. So
Mm-hmm.
it could be a request response based API, it could be a
Mm-hmm.
streaming job, it could be a batch based process. But how do you touch the system as little times as possible so that it automatically deploys into the production? Yeah, so that's
Mm-hmm.
what MLOps tries to solve.
Could we say that MLOps brings together the data engineers, data scientist, and the machine learning engineer?
In a sense, it does, because when you think about the MLOps stack and tooling that
Yes.
allows you to do MLOps in an organization, you usually start from feature stores that basically connect um, data engineers with either machine learning engineers and data scientists, and
Mm-hmm.
you end up with some deployment tooling which connects your machine learning engineers, your data scientists, and software engineers or operations engineers. So basically, yeah, it allows you to connect all of it together.
Hmm.
It does act as a glue for
Hmm.
everything. I would agree with that statement.
All right. So we understand better MLOps. That was kind of the introduction towards uh, some questions that I have for this, and also for some of you who are listening, we received some questions and topics to approach. So we'll talk a little bit more about machine learning. I would like to ask you, if that's okay, you let me know about a business perspective
Mhm.
to start approaching. Could you have like a business case, for example, in which we could use this as an example of how your company adds value? Because you were just before you were mentioning, for example, having a website and recommendation systems.
Mhm.
Could you have an application of a business case for people to understand better how MLOps, like the pipeline, without like
Yeah,
getting to.
sure. So we could even take recommendation system as an example.
All right.
It is very popular actually use case because you will find recommendation systems on almost every e-commerce site, right?
Yeah.
So we could take it as an example and then maybe build out the entire MLOps lifecycle for that, right? If
Mm-hmm.
that
Yes,
would
that sounds
work.
great. That sounds super fun.
Okay, cool. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about recommendation system design, because
Mm-hmm.
usually would have two models, maybe more, but you would have at least two machine learning models or something machine learning based
Mm-hmm.
in that system. Because once you do a search in a website, right, you usually are searching, let's say, for clothes. You would search for red boots or something, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that would return to you possibly tens of thousands of results if it's a big e-commerce, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first model is usually this uh, unit selection model, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what do you retrieve? So what are these top, let's say, 10,000 items that you would like
Yes.
to retrieve after you do search? And then on top of that, you would plug in a more complicated model, which
Okay.
is usually called ranking model, and it allows you to on that smaller set of items rank them so that you have the most attractive ones at the very top.
Yes.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
at least two models in the system.
Okay.
So you pass
Mm-hmm.
the items through the first one and then through the second one. So how MLOps helps in this? So first of all, usually you could work on these two problems as a separate problems. So there would be most likely two different teams working on separate pieces of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and when you're looking into MLOps pipeline, this is how it starts. So business comes up with the idea that we need to, well, have a recommendation system in our website because we don't have
Mm-hmm.
anything. Usually, initially, you do something really non-machine learning based. So you would have some rule-based engines that do that, and you would have that piece of technology as your baseline. So you want to improve it with introducing some machine learning elements to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you hire some data scientists or machine learning engineers to do that. So what we would do, we would extract some data from. Uh, so now a good question would be a good question time to ask. Are we talking about already a efficient MLOps system or something that is not yet MLOps based? Maybe let's call it. Let's try and do efficient MLOps system.
Okay. What is the difference between two?
So once you start with machine learning, you really don't have any MLOps practices in place. So you would
Okay.
do everything in your experimentation environment. So imagine notebooks, Jupyter notebooks. You extract some
Yes.
data, you
Mm-hmm.
do some validation, you do some exploratory analysis on top of it, you do some transformations, you test a few maybe models that can produce the result.
Mm-hmm.
You would pick the best one, and then you just store it somewhere in, let's say, S3 or any other object storage for your software engineers to pick up and put it
Yes.
inside of your website application, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you But it's not scalable, it's not traceable back, it has a lot of bad things in that system. So when you introduce MLOps, so I'll try to maybe say what, in my opinion, is the correct way to structure everything, right?
Yes.
So usually you have, as initial touch point, you have a feature store. So feature store is something that is already mounted on top of your on your different data storage. It could
Okay.
be, for example, a data warehouse. And in data warehouse, you would have your data mart that is specifically prepared for machine learning use cases. So you could have
Mm.
user data there, you could have your item data there, etc. So you mount a feature store on top of it, and feature store extracts that data from the from the data marts
Mm-hmm.
periodically, let's say. And then in your feature store system, you define those feature transformations. So usually you want to, very simple example here is that you want to transform all of your features into numbers, right? Because machine learning models only understand numbers. You have to train on
Yes.
numbers and you need to serve on
Mm-hmm.
numbers, right? So you do that uh, in machine learning system, and then you expose those computed features to the machine learning engineers and data scientists, right?
Mm.
So they would be responsible for the transformations themselves as well, but they would already get transformed features from the system. So then
Mm-hmm. So this
Initially,
is the star you mentioned, right?
yeah, you
Okay.
usually start at this point in time. So
Okay,
this is how you
perfect.
expose data to your machine learning systems, right?
Awesome. Yes, of
Eh,
course.
and then, of course, you would connect initially with your notebooks to this data. You would do the same things that you would do without the feature store.
Mm-hmm.
Once you see that you have something going on that you could maybe deploy, then this is the moment in time where a machine learning pipeline comes into play, and you want to orchestrate it basically. So you have a
Mm-hmm.
orchestrator. It could be Airflow, but it
Yes.
could be something more machine learning specific. But let's say it's just Airflow, right?
Yes.
And it would have the same steps that you do have in your experimentation environment. So extract data, validate it, transform it if needed. Additionally, log some profiles of it, track everything in experiment tracking system,
Mm-hmm.
uh, train the model, validate the model, test the model on the holdout dataset,
Mm-hmm.
and put the model into a model registry. So there are already two elements that are not present in the initial system, three elements that are not present
Mm-hmm.
in the initial system. So that's a feature store, that's machine learning pipeline, which is orchestrated, and that is uh, model registry or model store, where you actually store all of your models.
Mm-hmm.
And this already, having all of this already allows you to reproduce your experiment in the future if you wanted to, because you have tracked what data you used to train the model. You have tracked your random seeds that you put into your model.
Mm-hmm.
You track your hyperparameters that were the best ones in your model. You track the model artifact, right?
Mm.
And then,
And when you say you track on this point, what do you mean by tracking? Is it like, for example, with the star feature, you have all the values, or is it because you have the star feature plus the orchestrator that you are like you in your pipeline, the parameters, for example, in Airflow allow you to like keep all those features, those parameters, those hyper like the fine tuning you've done, and like how does it work? What do you mean by that?
so it really doesn't matter on what orchestrator you run your experiments, right? On. So the thing that matters is that you can track the actual pipeline execution, right? So in Airflow, that would be a DAG run ID, right? So you
Mm.
track that. You need to know specifically which DAG run produced all of the metadata, and then
Yeah.
per step. So per step, it really depends on what kind of experiment tracking you're using. But I think that the good ones allow you flexibility, so you can very easily plug those as libraries into your training code.
Mm-hmm.
Just ship the metadata that is needed for reproducibility and analysis as well.
Mm-hmm.
Experiment tracking system. So it could be your accuracy, it could be your loss rate, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that you are interested in. If it's a computer vision problem, you would even track images. If it's a video, you could track a image series, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there is a like bounding boxes, but if you're trying to do the object detection, you might as well track those, right? So to analyze the performance of your model
Mm.
efficiently in the experiment tracking system. So it usually has a UI where you can log in and do your analysis on the efficientness of your models, right?
All right. All right. So, and once we are at this point, because I want to ask about scalability of those tools,
Yeah.
but when we're at this point and we have this tracking, is there another step after that, like, or can we directly implement those models into, for example, was the website
Yeah.
and
So
having a recommendation system?
I can give a little bit of background on that as well. So you already have, let's say, a model registry where your
Yeah.
models are stored. Usually,
Mm-hmm.
very oftenly, you don't point to these artifacts directly from production. So
Mm-hmm.
you would pre-build a container that
Mm-hmm.
would host your code that is needed to run the model, and the model itself already in that container, so you can just deploy it straight to the prod.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it would most likely, the code itself would also have some business logic in it, so you would
Mm-hmm.
have some pre-processing before data
Okay.
goes into the model
Okay.
binary, and then you might do some business logic even after that.
Okay.
And imagine you already have a container ready to be deployed. Then you could hook up your system uh, to a deployment pipeline. So you could, let's say,
Okay.
have a in model registries. You usually have a model, and you have lots of model versions for that specific model. So let's say it's a pre-ranking model, right? So the initial model, you can have different versions for it. Some of the versions will be better than others, and they also have a state assigned to them. So it could be production, staging, dev, archive, etc. You could have a webhook, which basically triggers once
Yes.
you switch your state from dev to prod, for example, or
Mm.
for staging to prod, and then it kicks up off the deployment pipeline automatically.
Mm.
And the deployment pipeline will vary significantly depending on what kind of system you're deploying your models in. Let's say
Mm.
it, let's say it is a Kubernetes cluster that
Mm-hmm.
deploys your machine learning model as a well deployment in Kubernetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So uh, it could be a pipeline which basically does. And imagine that you have your Git ops correctly set up. So you have Argo CD running in your
Mm-hmm.
Kubernetes cluster. It's pointing to a repository. Then this deployment pipeline could do a pull request to that repository, just change the container,
Mm-hmm.
not container, but image version,
Yes.
which needs to be deployed in Kubernetes. And either automatically, usually it's not automatically, but you would ping a person who would review that pull request. And if everything's fine, he approves that, and you deploy a new container version to your Kubernetes cluster. And
Thank
that
you.
container already serves the use case. So basically, it can,
Mm.
once a user does a request to that API
Mm-hmm.
knows which features you need to fetch from a feature store, and it gives back your results, right? Probably list of the objects that you want to return as initial
Yes.
search result, right?
Yes, yes, totally. And you mentioned about pull requests, so I might want to ask you a bit uh, about pull request and how to work as a team on a data project. But first of all, thank you for sharing all this value. It's not every day that we can have such great insights. I mean, of course, there are a lot of MLOps courses online that will explain everything, but I feel like I followed you through the process, and now I have more value. I wanted to get back on the scalability of the
Mm-hmm.
tools that we use. So regarding like, I mean, the scalability, the main problem I would assume would be if we have on-prem data, because if everything is in the cloud, we can just pay for more resources based on the specific
Mm-hmm.
tools. But how would you approach a data product that will start with, like, for example, every month 50 million rows more, and through time? How would you approach a problem like that, and how does it impact the MLOps process and what we just described?
So you're referring to training the model or serving the model? Like for serving the
So,
model, it's the traffic that is the scaling factor, right? So how many users
uh-huh,
you have.
yes.
Or for the training part, yes. So it's the data set size that matters. So maybe
And
let's
but
start. Mhm.
could we, for example, train a model with a data set, and if we're very happy with the accuracy, um, we won't train it again? Or how do you approach retraining a model,
Mhm.
and like what KPIs or what approach, what framework do you use? Sorry, to define when to retrain a model.
Okay, so this is probably one of the hardest questions because different companies do it differently.
Mm,
Um, I've seen it done. Actually, usually, quite a lot of I believe that quite a lot of companies find the process of identifying when you should retrain your model a lot harder than just going with retraining it every week, for example.
mm, okay.
Because understanding when you need to retrain sometimes it's just not worth it.
Yes.
So yeah, because usually how I also seen it done, you would use not the entire data set to train your model, but let's say
Mm,
your e-commerce. So you would maybe take the last 7 days or the last month worth of
mm-hmm,
data. Of
mm-hmm,
course, it's increasing in size because you expect your user base to grow, right? But
mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's how you would do it. You could
Okay.
just schedule it to retrain. either
Mm.
daily, either weekly or monthly. And in that way,
Mm-hmm.
you will usually solve for things like feature drifts and concept drifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not concept drifts, but feature drifts more
Okay.
specific.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for all the value. I will not ask
Okay, but
you.
maybe getting back a little bit back to it. So of course you would want to, in a very robust MLOps system, you would want to monitor feature drifts, concept drifts, or just running sanity checks, let's say, or every day. For example,
Yes.
if you have a
Mm-hmm.
system which gives you really quick feedback, you could run your models in prod for a day. You
Mm-hmm.
will get your predictions. Then you could generate, not generate, but retrieve ground truths for some of them. And then you can just check if your accuracy or other F1 metrics or whatever metrics
Mm-hmm.
are still good enough daily,
Mm-hmm.
and monitor in that way. And then
Mm.
once you see something that is not desirable, you can then trigger a retraining.
Okay.
And when
Okay.
it comes to scalability from another side, like how do you deal with additional 500,000 rows and eventually 5 million rows per day if your business scales?
Mm.
Then there are definitely distributed training frameworks for that, right? So you can train your models on Spark,
Hmm.
for example.
Yeah. So now that I've heard a few tools and you enhance the overall process of MLOps and some distinctions to do that are important. Could you give us maybe a few tools that you would consider using with your experience?
Okay, so yeah, so for feature stores, there are, I would say, few that you can choose from. There are not that many players in the field, but
Okay. Okay.
if it's open source, fully open source, definitely
Okay.
you will probably go for Feast. But then there are commercial players like Tecton, Hopsworks, and now
Okay.
Featureform as well. I
Mm-hmm.
know that Featureform also has some open source, I think, offering. When it comes to pipeline orchestration, definitely there are cloud offerings like SageMaker pipelines, Vertex AI pipelines.
Yeah.
Then you could use Airflow. There is Kubeflow, but then again, Vertex AI pipelines is managed Kubeflow basically.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there is ZenML, a very good, very new player in not super new, few years, but it tries to streamline basically usage of our MLOps tools and put
Yes.
everything into pipeline, right? It allows you
Okay.
to, for example, use Airflow as an orchestrator and then some other frameworks for different pieces of the pipeline
Mm-hmm.
with a single interface that they
Okay.
provide. Then when it comes to experiment tracking, yeah, I'm biased here a little bit, right? So of course there is MLflow, the mostly popular one, and we are at Neptune, I think, are doing quite a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Model registries, again, Airflow, so not Airflow, MLflow, cloud offerings do have
Mm.
their own, and Neptune, right, has
Mm-hmm.
an offering. When it comes to deployment of models themselves, there are definitely choices like Selden Core, TF serving, uh, TF serving, and then uh, Kubeflow serving, and similar. So
Mm-hmm.
the tooling space is pretty vast, I would say.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so usually it will really depend on your organizational structure. It's not like every tool,
Of
one
course.
tool would fit everything that you want to
Of
do.
course. Of course. Then the first thing is to understand what is there, and then build from this. Okay. So this is a lot of value for everyone who are interested in MLOps, and I'm super happy and thank you for sharing all this value. I might want to take a step back here and ask you about your journey as a data scientist because you mentioned that you have 11 years of career at the moment of the episode. Um, and I'm thinking to some people who are new in the field, for example, who have 2, 3 years of experience and how are approaching the data scientist role, the data engineer role, the machine learning engineer role, MLOps roles, which is becoming more and more. Lately, in one episode, we talked about the business scientist role, which is an hybrid between business analyst and data scientist. So
I haven't yet heard about that
you
one,
haven't?
but okay.
I discussed it with Gus Reyes on the last episode that we recorded. But so based on that, if I would ask you today, um, if you would be recruiting in your team,
Mhm.
let's do it for the data scientist and the data engineer. What would you expect to be like the qualities, the qualities and the tools of the data scientist to be known, or what knowledge would you test the person on? Could I ask you this question?
Yeah, let's try and figure out it, figure it out together, right? Uh, I wasn't really hiring for data scientists specifically, but I could come up with a list of things that I would like to see. So, it, the role of data scientists changed quite a lot throughout the years, right? So now data
Mm-hmm.
scientists definitely need to be really business focused. So they need to understand business problems and what we actually want to solve before
Mm-hmm.
they start jumping into the models and tooling.
Yeah.
Of course, high level. Okay, so if we are talking about entry level data scientists, then high level knowledge of machine learning models and the concepts themselves are definitely something you would look for, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to tooling, naturally, it's Python, right? Python, Jupyter
Mm-hmm.
Notebook, SQL becoming a lot more important in the more we move into the current
Mm-hmm.
time, right? Because now data scientists are definitely expected to do exploratory data analysis in data warehouses or data
Mm-hmm.
lakes themselves. So it's not like you will get data pre-processed for you and you're just running your machine learning training
Yeah.
algorithms, right?
Yes.
And the connection between what do you search for and
Uh-huh.
what business value you're trying to actually bring,
Mm-hmm.
it's super important, right? Then
Yeah.
stakeholder management, because well, you will be communicating majority, not majority, but a lot of your day to day, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you want to, yeah, sell the value that you're providing.
Mm-hmm.
And then comes the machine learning training part. So what do you actually use to solve a problem? And not jumping to a machine learning as a first option is also valuable. Like initially, maybe data scientists were thought of as a pure machine learning machines, right? But now, if you can solve a problem with just analytical tools and rather not using machine learning, it's maybe even more valuable than actually
Hmm.
training a machine learning model and using it.
When you say analytical tools, do you refer as, for example, a linear regression
No, that's
or
already a machine learning
yeah, that's what I
problem.
thought. So
No,
what
no,
do you mean? Just like for example a KPI, like a mean,
no, no,
like
no. More of a, if you can implement this, if you can solve this problem by just doing some rule-based stuff, right? That you don't use machine learning to
yeah,
implement, then just
okay,
do it. Don't go for machine learning just because you want to do it, right?
okay,
Sometimes it will bring even more,
okay,
maybe more accuracy than machine learning.
okay. Okay, so let's say I have a business problem and I have my data set and I've run through important KPIs and I find a way to calculate them and then I have a great visual to see those KPIs and those KPIs themselves solve the problem. No needs
Yeah,
to go from machine learning. That would be what you referred to, right?
yeah, yeah. But definitely,
All right.
there are problems. There are lots of problems that will require machine learning in nowadays. So
Hmm.
yeah, but you can probably see that it's a lot about personality and business acumen and understanding business problems rather
Mm-hmm.
than pure technical role.
Yeah.
And when it comes to data engineering, it's a little bit different, right? Data engineers
Hmm.
are
But that's a perfect transition. Would you mind doing the same exercise for a data engineer?
yeah. So there are probably a few types of data engineers. Ones that are closer to the business, ones that are less close to the business. So
Uh huh.
even in the recent years, there is this new role, analytical engineer, right? So analytical engineer is a mix of data engineer and data analyst.
Okay.
Basically, it's a person who mostly works in a data warehouse and communicates with business stakeholders and
Mm-hmm.
also at the same time builds data models in the data warehouse to answer those questions, so those business
Mm-hmm.
problems. So for such a person, usually it's a mix of data engineering and and data analytics skill sets. So as well, a very strong business focus, but then you turn to the modern data stack, which is basically uh, usually a cloud data warehouse, right? And a tool like dbt to glue everything together and to perform
Mm.
transformations on top of it. So I, from an analytical engineer, I would expect knowledge, either very strong knowledge of just SQL. If you have dbt in your company, then dbt as well, plus
Mm-hmm.
business side, right?
Okay. Okay.
When it comes
Well,
to a regular data engineer, so the one which is the, or let's call it original data engineer,
all
so
right.
more technical data engineer, that which is now moving more towards the software engineering side little by little. So I do expect there eventually to be a split where data engineers either move to analytical engineering or decide to move closer to software engineers. So this is where you will need to know distributed compute more deeply. So you could be working directly with Spark yourself, or any or other distributed frameworks. Then
Mm.
naturally SQL, because now most of these distributed compute frameworks also provide SQL interfaces, and people want to write SQL rather than just using program like native programming languages. Even though I'm
Mm-hmm.
more on the side of using native programming languages, because these are more easily testable and more prod ready. Let's call it, right. So then things like real-time processing come in. So stream processing. Yeah,
Okay.
if you know some stream processing framework, that's really
Kafka.
cool. Kafka is a stream processing, not stream processing framework. It's more of a distributed log on which you can mount the stream processing framework like Flink
Okay.
or Spark Streaming.
Flink.
Uh,
Oh yeah. Well, Hadoop had another one, right?
there,
Of stream processing.
I know that there's Kafka streams, so native
Kafka.
Kafka. Um,
Yeah, Kafka strings. That sounds familiar.
there's also
Um,
of course Storm, uh,
hmm.
but yeah, these are more or less known ones, right?
All right. So many tools. Well, thanks a lot for sharing all this value. I'm sure this will help some data scientists, data engineers that
And
are here.
one more maybe thing is
Okay.
integrations, right? So you
Integration.
also be working on integrating third party, not necessarily third party, but maybe internal systems as well with the data layer. So how to push data from, let's say, a database to
Mm.
either directly into object storage or a real-time queue.
Mm.
And of
Yeah.
course, external systems like Salesforce and other CRM tools and similar. How do you connect them to your data systems, right?
Right.
Of course, then data modeling comes into play. So there are lots of things you need to know, but
Of course, but that's what exciting about it. It is like it is. It has truly this. I always like to think, sorry, about all of this as Legos and how everything comes to one place, and how to find the best optimization based on what we have at the beginning, the data architecture, um, making the distinction between data architecture and data engineer is one thing also that could be interesting to discuss. Um, that being said, I would like to ask you a bit more about your presence online, because I know you have your newsletter, and you're sharing so much value there. Um, so I recommend everyone listening, if you want to really get your hands into data and have pro tips, check out the newsletter of Aurimas. Um, for those who aren't subscribed yet to your newsletter, I think it could be interesting to ask you about why did you started sharing your journey, and what are the main topics you tend to share about, and maybe at the end if we can have a few insights of top things that you've shared, it could really benefit to all of us. So yeah, can you start with your journey on LinkedIn, for example?
yeah, sure. So actually, I started the first post I did. I think it was now already 10 months ago or 9 months ago.
Okay.
Like the first actual post where I had an intention to do some regular posting and teaching people about subjects that I
Hmm.
thought important. Um, Yeah, so I didn't have that much following back then. I had 1,300, I think, followers when I started, and initial ones were more of a about team structures. Why do you need ML platform team? Which
Mm.
I believe is very important, but it's definitely not what took my following numbers off. Right, so I did that for a few months, and then I started doing some more technical posts, so explaining fundamental concepts around machine learning and data engineering and maybe storage, some storage systems, and people started liking them, and I'm really thankful to everyone who did. And I got some nice amount of followers on LinkedIn. But then in a few weeks after I started to actually do this more of technical deep dives, people started saving, of course, those posts in LinkedIn. And then I got few requests of like, how can I read them? How can I browse through the archive? LinkedIn is not a good platform for that. So actually, that's when I decided to do a newsletter. And if you would look at the current state of my newsletter, it's just my LinkedIn posts bundled into a single package and sent out weekly.
Mm.
But it's definitely not how it will be in the future. Part of it will continue to be this, but not all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So topics I talk about now, it's machine learning, MLOps, and data engineering focused mainly, and the entire, let's say, data stack architecture, so end-to-end data stacks, and how you deliver value from the beginning, from the
Mm-hmm.
data generation till the actual model in production.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then I zoom in into specific parts of it, and then try to explain them in more deeper fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do now. But I do plan to also do some long form content very soon. And I say long
Okay.
form, I mean not just the LinkedIn post, because most of my posts that are on LinkedIn is at the character limits of how many characters are allowed on LinkedIn. So there's also a very very limited amount of knowledge I could put into those. So I'm planning to do some long forms and not
Hmm.
send not send them out through LinkedIn, but make them exclusive on the newsletter.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and you can also always in the future, and this is something we will do in Let's Talk AI. Get direct questions from your subscribers and do some little 30 minutes lives
I
where
will, I'm planning to do that as well. Maybe
cool.
monthly or every 2 weeks. But for that, you still need to like establish a community with your
Yeah, and have a yeah, and the back and forth, and this is really what we try to do at Stock AI, and we're super happy to see some messages where we see that we are adding value. We get requests of specific subjects to approach. For example, today we talked a lot about MLOps and machine learning, and this have been a request. So that's super insightful. So thanks a lot for sharing all of this and
maybe very, very, very interesting point you touched here, right? So, like, without the people that read my content, like, I'm nothing, right? Because I don't really, it doesn't bring value to me. So only if I can teach people something and
mm,
things that they care about does it really bring value to me as well, because I'm
hmm.
doing something important, right?
Yeah,
So
that's. I'm thinking about sharing value
mhm,
in the workspace. So you have a community online, and you try to add value
mhm,
and share your value and your knowledge and your expertise, and uh, and in the end, this ends up helping a lot of very curious people that are at earlier stage of their career. But I always think of mentoring in the workspace, because a lot of the time many of us will only have the people in the company to share with, and a lot of us will try to find mentors or guidance into the company, and not outside, or with external people. So how do you approach teaching and sharing the value that you've acquired through your career on your company, on the people in your team? and how do you approach mentoring for yourself?
Okay, so I spent a lot of time just uh, talking with people that I've worked with. So I was a team lead. I was a team lead for several teams. Definitely, I think that the most value you bring is just speaking with people, placing them in the correct projects so that we can apply what you teach to them, and of course, providing correct resources so that we can develop independently from yourself, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
books to read, what maybe courses to take, but courses are not like there are lots of courses, but I don't think that there has to be a good course to take, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are too many, and it's very easy to uh,
Yeah.
get into the wrong one. Yeah, but I believe that allowing people to work independently, not
Mm-hmm.
overly micromanaging them, is a key to an employee's success, because that's how people learn. If you micromanage your employees, that's you know, definitely neither brings value to you nor to them nor to
Mm.
the results that will be produced. So give them good knowledge, but place them into a correct projects that they can succeed in. Give them freedom. Teach them how to take ownership of that freedom, and I think
Mm-hmm.
we are good to go.
That's great. That's great.
Because
How do you approach?
that's also, by the way, learning people to fish and not giving them a fish, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is so important because the lessons and the experience is in this specific part where you don't show people how to do it, but you give them tools to learn by themselves to be able to achieve a specific task. And you just provide guidance, like when you're fishing, just go a little bit on the right, just pull a little bit more. And I don't know why I'm doing fishing analogies, but anyway, I think it's pretty clear. And about mentoring for you, because this is something I always like to ask. We always tend to ask people who have a lot of experience, how do they mentor others, but how do you find mentors for yourself, and how do you keep improving uh, on your journey?
Yeah, so I would definitely need to be better at this. So in my professional career, I had good mentors, but definitely not throughout the life cycle,
Mm,
uh, not throughout the entire of my career. So I was very lucky to get a very strong mentor when I was in a leadership role. So when I
mm-hmm,
was leading several teams, I
mm-hmm,
was very lucky there. But when it comes to, I would say, technical leadership, like leading a single team of technical individuals, I wouldn't say that I was lucky at that point in time. So I had to learn quite a lot of myself, and I definitely, yeah, I wasn't a good team lead initially. I don't know if I was a good team lead in my later career, but hopefully so. But initially,
mm,
definitely not a good team lead, and I did mistakes. I learned from them, and that's how I grew,
mm.
I would say.
Mm. On the episode with Adam Sroka, he shared the same insights. He learned leadership the hard way, even though he had some guidance. He learned it the hard way, and he told me he was very bad at the beginning. I might
Yeah,
had one very too much. I mean, he told me that it was difficult at the beginning, basically,
I
and
mean, people coming from individual contributors straight to the leadership roles, yeah, they need mentorship. They definitely need good
mm,
mentors, and I don't think there are many in the industry,
mm,
because if you're in the tech company and it's not like these big tech companies, I would imagine that in like Facebooks and Amazon, etc., you would get the mentorship. But in these startups, right, where
mm,
everyone is technically technical at the beginning, and those people then become team leads, and we never had team lead experience. So
mm,
if we start scaling, if you don't bring new leadership talent into the company,
mm,
there's no one to actually mentor you, right?
mm.
Not that good situation to be in.
Yeah, and this might be one of the reasons where a lot of people who go at Microsoft, AWS, Meta, this might be one of the reasons where we can see those people in the startups after, and they're staying to big leadership roles because they might have this experience at some point. Um, but would you say also that, for example, for top 50 Forbes AI startups, we can find, like for big AI startups or big startups in general, we can find this kind of leadership, or is it less in the big tech
No, no,
companies?
that's what exactly what I meant. But I think that in
Mm.
these big tech giants, there should be more quality leadership.
Mm.
Small ones,
Okay.
because in small ones, as mentioned, you start only with technical people. Then those technical people become managers without any skill set or experience, and so on, right? And in big companies like Facebook's, like Meta's and Amazon's, we are more probably already established in good practices when it comes to
Mm.
leadership, right?
Yeah, yeah, I understand. Um, Okay, great. Great. So this is about the mentoring section, how you learned, how you improve. Um, I would have one questions regarding maybe one last question before asking the questions I always ask in the episode. I already asked you about how to improve yourself. The two last questions of the episode should be how can people reach out, learn more about you? Of course, we'll put the newsletter in the description and a message for the audience. But before getting into this, I would like to ask you about the future of the field. What is your perspective on how MLOps, machine learning, and all those data roles, data engineer, data scientist, machine learning engineer, how the field for you is going to evolve through time in the, for example, 10 next years?
Oh wow, then next year's the industry is moving so fast with all of these
I know.
foundational models now being released, right?
Hmm.
But I don't think that it will not change like the basic models for a quite long time in the future. There
Hmm.
will be these foundational models, but then there will be all of these specialized models that are, I think, at least here to stay for the next 5 years, right? At least, and MLOps will be needed here. What I think maybe will happen. So we now have a MLOps space completely fragmented. Like there is a specific tool for a very small problem, and then you glue everything into a single hole. There are just too many tools. I think that I do believe that the entire MLOps probably life cycle could be split into three or two parts, bigger parts that will come into like managed bundles of capabilities. I'm not
Hmm.
I'm not a fan of end-to-end machine learning platforms because yeah, they are usually under delivering in a single piece of the technology, for example.
Okay.
Right? So
Hmm.
I think that it's best to split the entire life cycle into three parts. There will definitely be feature feature platform part, so
Hmm.
feature stores, etc., but a little bit broader, like how do you manage your data sets, how do you share them throughout the organization, but it shouldn't probably reach out more, maybe into the deployment model deployment side, maybe, right? Then
Mm.
definitely there will be observability tools, and here uh, day two monitoring comes in. So once the model is deployed, what do you do there, right? So
Mm.
then is this experiment tracking systems and model registries. So probably these could expand a little bit into
Okay.
capabilities.
Hmm.
But when it comes to so this is when it comes to MLOps tooling, right?
Hmm.
uh,
All right.
when it comes to machine learning itself, there are still, I think, a lot of problems to solve when it comes to simple models.
Hmm.
In 10 years, oh man, in 10 years, maybe no one will be doing anything, right? 10 years is a long time. And maybe there will be no data scientists. Maybe there will be no software engineers anymore. Right?
But don't you think it is, in a way, it is like the job today that, like the value of a data scientist, you described it very well because there is a more and more business part into it and like interpreting the numbers and for example I was speaking with Vin Vashista and he explained me like how he was helping people um, to implement machine learning as one more member in the team. So do you believe um, like the entire those roles could like totally disappear, or would you consider more like human machine team where human enhance the output of the values, even though it will be less more and more easier to build all these systems because everything will be automated?
Okay, so but now we are talking 10 years in the future, right? Not two, not
10,
three, not
10
five,
years,
not
let's
five, 10,
10
10.
years, let's go 10 years.
So let's say in 10 years, everything is covered by uh, these like foundational models or something, right?
Mm.
Maybe even more, not 10 years. Uh, yeah, hard to say. So there will definitely need to be humans in the loop in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how it will look like, I don't know. It's really
All right, all right. As I won't push it.
it will definitely not be called data scientist. I think.
I see, I see, I see. I
But
totally
now,
see.
what I definitely see in the short term future, like now we have data scientists, we have machine learning engineers, right? So machine learning engineers are putting machine learning models into production, but we could as well do data science as well. So question is if there is a need to consolidate these, or could data scientists do the entire end-to-end if good enough machine learning platforms are in place. But what I think would most likely happen, more likely to happen, is that data scientists would take more of a data analyst responsibilities, like keeping their responsibilities, but also
Mm-hmm.
taking more of data analyst responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Okay.
machine learning engineers maybe moving a little bit closer to what taking some of responsibilities that data scientists are now uh, considered that we should be doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Well, thanks a lot for all the informations. Let's jump to the two last questions of the podcast, and I want to know that we're very thankful to learning from you, and thanks for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure learning from experienced and expert people like yourself. So the question to yeah, the previous question to your message would be, how can people reach out to you? Where can people find you? We discussed it a bit earlier, but can you sum it up?
Yeah, so I'm on mostly on LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn you can find me Aurimas Griciūnas. But I already have his central hub website, swirlai.com. So it
Mm-hmm.
basically hosts links to all of my other social stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find more about everything there. So I do plan to expand the newsletter. There will be a YouTube channel, 100%, uh, and most likely a sort of a community also coming. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it could be a private Slack community. I am not yet 100% sure what it will look
Mm-hmm.
like, but yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again. Would you have a message to end this episode together? Would you have a message for the Let's Talk AI audience? It could
Ah,
be personal, it could be professional, it could be about MLOps, machine learning, whatever you want.
okay. So maybe something professional. So learn fundamentals. I think that it's very important to learn things that do not change independent of the platforms you work on, independent on what the future holds for us, right? So these could be like when it comes to more technical stuff, learn fundamentals of how distributed compute works, how the machine learning itself is, on what kind of things the machine learning itself is based on, system design. How do you stitch up systems independent of what kind of tooling you're using, right?
Mm.
Uh, business acumen, right? Understand how businesses work, how to bring value to
Mm-hmm.
them, how to communicate with
Mm.
people. So these things
Okay.
will stick.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for everyone who made it to the end with us. We're super happy to have you here on the podcast. The podcast is still growing, and feel free to reach out with your questions, the subjects that you want to approach. Thanks again, Aurimas, for everything. The knowledge you shared is so much valuable. And I'll see you on the newsletter on LinkedIn. And I wish you to have a wonderful day.
maybe one more thing that I forgot to mention.
All right, for the ones
So
who are still here.
yeah, so last week I 2 weeks ago I started this SwirlAI talent collective, which strives to connect employers with possible employees. So if you are disturbed by what's happening in the job market, just register, and hopefully it will help you somehow. There are more than 200 jobs, data-related jobs, in the job board. Yeah, it's also in the central website, so
Hmm.
you can find it there.
Thanks. We'll definitely push this information. So if you're still here on the episode, you have the information. Thanks again, Aurimas, for everything. And I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.